I stood in the courthouse hallway, staring at the official document in my trembling hands. My son's name, the name I had given him, the name I had whispered to him as a newborn, the name I had proudly called out at every graduation, every birthday, every moment that mattered, was gone. Erased. Legally replaced with his wife's maiden name. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I discovered 3 months later, when I hired a private investigator and learned exactly why he had done it. And when I tell you what I found, you'll understand why I did what I did next. You might even think I'm a monster. But I promise you, by the end of the story, you'll know that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who destroy us from the inside out. I'm 62 years old, and until 18 months ago, I thought I understood my life. I thought I knew my son. I was wrong about everything. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm a retired English teacher from Sacramento, California. I spent 37 years shaping young minds, grading essays at midnight, and attending parent-teacher conferences where I somehow convinced exhausted parents that their children had potential even when they'd turned in book reports on movies they'd never watched. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable. I had a small pension, a paid-off house in a decent neighborhood, and a son I believed was the pinnacle of everything I'd sacrificed for. His name was Daniel Chen. Past tense, because that person doesn't exist anymore. Not legally, anyway. Now, he's Daniel Morrison. His wife's name. A complete erasure of me, of his father who died when Daniel was 12, of 34 years of our family history. Gone with a judge's signature and some legal paperwork I didn't even know existed until it was too late. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. I didn't see it coming. Not even a little bit. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not to the courthouse, not to the name change, but to 3 years ago when my son Daniel married Victoria Morrison. I should have seen the red flags at the wedding. I really should have. Victoria came from money, real money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Her family owned a commercial real estate development company in San Francisco, the kind of business where deals happened over golf games and charitable galas. They had a vacation home in Napa, another in Lake Tahoe, and the kind of generational wealth that made my teacher's pension look like pocket change. The wedding was at a vineyard estate in Sonoma. 250 guests. A string quartet for the ceremony and a 12-piece band for the reception. Flowers flown in from Ecuador. A cake that cost more than my first car. I remember standing there in my department store dress, the nicest one I owned, navy blue with a modest neckline, watching Victoria's mother, Patricia Morrison, glide through the reception in what I later learned was a $15,000 Vera Wang gown. Patricia barely spoke to me that day. When we were finally introduced, she offered me a smile that never reached her eyes and said, "You must be so proud of Daniel. Victoria is quite the catch." As if my son had won a prize rather than married a partner. I laughed it off. I told myself she was just one of those society women, all polish and no warmth. I told myself it didn't matter because Daniel loved me, and Daniel would never let anyone diminish our relationship. I was so naive. The first 6 months of their marriage seemed normal enough. Daniel called me every Sunday afternoon, like he always had. We'd talk about his work. He was a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in San Francisco, doing well, but not spectacularly so. He'd tell me about cases he was working on, about his colleagues, about the new apartment they'd rented in Pacific Heights. Victoria was always busy during these calls. Shopping with friends, yoga classes, volunteer work for some foundation or another. I didn't think much of it. Young marriages need time to find their rhythm. I'd been married for 12 wonderful years before my husband Thomas died of a heart attack, leaving me with a 10-year-old son and a mortgage I barely managed to pay off before retiring. I understood that newlyweds needed space. But then the calls started getting shorter. 10 minutes instead of 30. Daniel seemed distracted, answering my questions with brief responses before pivoting to, "Mom, I got to go. Victoria and I have dinner reservations." Or, "Mom, we're meeting her parents for brunch." Or, "Mom, Victoria needs help with something." Always Victoria. Always her schedule, her needs, her family. By the first anniversary of their marriage, our Sunday calls had dwindled to twice a month. Then once a month. Then nothing at all for 6 weeks straight. I tried not to panic. I texted him regularly, just little messages. Thinking of you. Hope work is going well. Miss hearing your voice. He'd respond with thumbs up emojis or brief, "Thanks, Mom," messages that felt like being patted on the head and dismissed. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was one of those mothers I'd always pitied, the ones who couldn't let go, who saw their daughter-in-law as competition. I promised myself I wouldn't become that woman. But then came Thanksgiving. For 34 years, Daniel and I had celebrated Thanksgiving together. It was our tradition. After Thomas died, it became sacred, just the two of us, making his father's terrible jokes about my dry turkey, watching football, falling asleep on the couch. Even during Daniel's college years, even when he was dating other women, he always came home for Thanksgiving. That October, I called him to discuss the menu. I'd been planning for weeks. I'd bought a new roasting pan. I'd found his favorite cranberry sauce recipe, the one with orange zest that Thomas used to make. "Mom," he said, and I heard something in his voice that made my chest tighten. "I meant to call you about that. Victoria and I are doing Thanksgiving with her family this year. In Napa, at their vacation house." I felt something crack inside me, hairline fracture, barely noticeable. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, what about the day after? We could do a second Thanksgiving, just the two of us?" "Mom, we'll be there all weekend. Victoria's whole family is coming. It's kind of a big deal for her." "And what about me?" The words came out before I could stop them. "Am I not a big deal?" "Don't do this," he said, and his tone had gone cold. "Don't make me feel guilty for spending time with my wife's family. I'm not. I just thought we always." "Things change, Mom. I'm married now. I can't just keep doing everything the way we've always done it." He hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the new roasting pan I'd been so excited about, and I cried for the first time since Thomas's funeral. But I told myself it was just an adjustment. First Thanksgiving as a married man. He'd be back to normal soon. He had to be. Christmas was worse. I bought them thoughtful gifts, a beautiful leather photo album for Victoria, monogrammed with their initials, expensive for my budget but worth it. For Daniel, I'd framed a collection of photos from his childhood, him graduating from high school, him at his law school graduation, him and Thomas at a Giants game 2 months before Thomas died. I drove to their apartment building in Pacific Heights on Christmas Eve. I'd called ahead, left a voicemail saying I'd drop by briefly, just to exchange gifts and wish them happy holidays. I wouldn't stay long. I'd promised myself I'd be breezy, casual, not clingy. The doorman in their building stopped me in the lobby. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm here to see my son, Daniel Chen, Unit 403. He checked his computer, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Morrison left instructions that he's not receiving visitors today." "Mr. Morrison." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me?" "Mr. Daniel Morrison and Mrs. Victoria Morrison. They're not accepting visitors on Christmas Eve." There must be a mistake. I'm his mother. I'm Margaret Chen. Daniel Chen is my son. The doorman looked uncomfortable. "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but those are the instructions I have." Mr. Morrison was quite clear. I stood there in that gleaming lobby with its marble floors and enormous Christmas tree, holding wrapped presents like a fool, and I felt something inside me die. I left the gifts with the doorman and drove home in a daze. I called Daniel 5 times that night. He didn't answer. I texted him. Nothing. Finally, at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, I received a text. "Mom, we needed Christmas to be just us and Victoria's family. Please respect our boundaries. We'll see you soon." I didn't hear from him for 2 months after that. It was during those 2 months that I started to unravel. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, mind racing with questions. Had I been a bad mother? Had I been too overbearing? Too distant? I replayed every conversation, every interaction with Victoria, looking for the moment I'd failed, the moment I'd said or done something unforgivable. My closest friend, Helen, told me I needed to let it go. Sometimes young men get absorbed into their wife's family, she said over coffee one gray February afternoon. Give it time. He'll come back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. In early March, I decided to take action. I wrote Daniel a letter, an actual handwritten letter, because texts and calls weren't working. I poured my heart onto those pages. I told him I loved him. I told him I missed him. I told him I was sorry if I'd overstepped somehow, but I needed to understand what had happened to us. I mailed it to their apartment. It was returned 3 weeks later, marked, "Return to sender," in handwriting I didn't recognize. Not Daniel's. Probably Victoria's. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have realized how deep this went. But I didn't. Because in April, Daniel finally called. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded strained. "I need to talk to you about something." My heart leaped. Finally, I thought. Finally, we're going to work this out. Finally, he's going to explain. "I'm listening, sweetheart," I said, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "I need you to understand that this isn't easy for me to say. But Victoria and I have been talking, and we both feel like there needs to be some distance between us for a while." Distance. My voice came out as a whisper. "What does that mean?" "It means we need space, Mom. You're too intense. You call too much, you text too much, you show up unannounced. I came by once on Christmas Eve with gifts. You don't understand how it feels, Mom. Victoria's family is very private, very reserved, and having you constantly trying to insert yourself into our lives is creating stress in our marriage." Insert myself. As if I were a stranger. Not the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his college application fees, who'd sat with him through every illness and heartbreak and failure. "Daniel, please," I said, and I was crying now. Couldn't help it. "I don't understand what I did wrong. Please just tell me what I did." "It's not about one thing, Mom. It's about a pattern. It's about you not respecting that I have a new family now." A new family. As if I'd been replaced. "How long?" I managed to ask. "How long is this distance supposed to last?" There was a long pause. Then, "I don't know, Mom. Maybe 6 months. Maybe a year. However long it takes for you to understand that things are different now." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the silence of my living room, and I realized something terrible. I had lost my son. Completely, utterly lost him. And I didn't even know why. But I was about to find out that losing him was just the beginning. Because 3 weeks after that phone call, I received a piece of mail that made everything suddenly, horrifyingly clear. It was a wedding invitation. Thick, expensive cardstock, embossed lettering. The kind of invitation that cost $5 per card. "Patricia and Robert Morrison request the honor of your presence at the vow renewal ceremony of their daughter Victoria Morrison and her husband Daniel Morrison." Daniel Morrison. Not Daniel Chen. Daniel Morrison. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the invitation. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. But no, there it was. Daniel Morrison. As if Chun, as if I, as if his father, as if our entire history had never existed. I called the courthouse the next morning. I gave them Daniel's full name and date of birth. The clerk put me on hold for 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. "Yes, ma'am," she said when she returned. "We have a record of a legal name change for Daniel Thomas Chun, now legally Daniel Thomas Morrison. The change was approved and finalized on February 14th of this year. Valentine's Day. How fitting. And there's no way to reverse it? No way to contest it. Ma'am, he's a 34-year-old adult. He doesn't need anyone's permission to change his name." I hung up and sat very still in my kitchen. The sun was shining through the window, hitting the spot where Daniel used to do his homework at the kitchen table. I could almost see him there, 9 years old, struggling with multiplication tables, looking up at me with those serious dark eyes and asking, "Mom, why is math so hard?" Because some things in life don't make sense, sweetheart. Sometimes you just have to push through even when you don't understand. I wish I'd known then that I was teaching him a lesson he'd eventually use against me. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I needed to know why. I needed to understand what had turned my son into a stranger. And if I couldn't get answers from Daniel, I'd get them another way. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. Something that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. His name was Raymond Torres, and he worked out of a cramped office in downtown Sacramento that smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. He was in his mid-50s, wore a rumpled suit, and had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Mrs. Chen," he said, gesturing to the worn chair across from his desk. "What can I do for you?" I told him everything. The wedding, the distance, the name change, the returned letter. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What exactly are you hoping to find?" "The truth," I said. "I need to know why my son erased me from his life." He leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Chen, I have to be honest with you. Sometimes the truth is worse than not knowing. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I should have listened to that warning. I should have walked out of that office and gone home and learned to live with the mystery. But I didn't. Because not knowing was killing me, slowly, one sleepless night at a time. "I'm sure," I said. He charged $3,000 for a basic investigation, background checks, surveillance, interviews with neighbors and colleagues. It would take 6 weeks. I wrote him a check from my retirement savings and left his office feeling both terrified and relieved. The waiting was agony. I'd wake up every morning wondering if today would be the day Raymond called with information. I started imagining scenarios. Maybe Daniel was being blackmailed. Maybe Victoria had some dark secret and they'd changed his name to hide from someone. Maybe it was witness protection. Maybe he was sick and didn't want to worry me. I created elaborate explanations because the simple truth that my son had chosen to erase me was too painful to accept. 6 weeks later, Raymond called. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to come to my office. Today, if possible." His voice was different. Careful. The way doctors sound before they give you bad news. I drove to his office in a fog. When I walked in, he had a thick manila folder on his desk, the kind you see in movies about criminal investigations. "Sit down," he said gently.
Iset.
"Mrs. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you, because you hired me to find the truth and you deserve to have it, even though I wish I didn't have to tell you this." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Your son Daniel didn't just change his name on a whim. This was part of a calculated plan orchestrated by his wife's family, specifically by Victoria's mother, Patricia Morrison." I stared at him. "What?" He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I interviewed 3 different people who know the Morrison family. Former employees, business associates, a woman who used to be Patricia Morrison's personal assistant. They all told me the same thing. Patricia Morrison is obsessed with social status and family legacy. When Daniel married Victoria, Patricia saw him as a problem. A problem? My voice sounded strange, distant. "You have to understand how these people think, Mrs. Chen." To Patricia Morrison, Daniel was good enough to marry her daughter. He's handsome, successful, intelligent. But his background wasn't right. Middle-class immigrant family, public school education, no family money or connections. Patricia wanted Victoria's children to have the Morrison name, the Morrison legacy, none of the Chen baggage. Baggage. My entire life, my husband's memory, our family history, reduced to baggage. So, she convinced Daniel to change his name? Raymond's face was grim. "It's worse than that." Patricia offered Daniel $200,000 and a partnership track at her husband's law firm, Morrison and Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in San Francisco. But there were conditions. He slid a document across the desk. It was a photocopy of what looked like a contract. My hands shook as I read it. In exchange for the partnership opportunity and financial compensation detailed above, Daniel Chen agrees to the following terms. 1. Legal name change to Daniel Morrison, to be completed no later than February 28th. 2. Establishment of clear boundaries with maternal family, including limited contact, quarterly at most, and no unexpected visits. The words blurred. I couldn't breathe. Keep reading, Raymond said quietly. 3. Future children will be raised with Morrison family values and traditions, with primary influence from paternal grandmother Patricia Morrison. 4. Any inheritance from maternal grandmother Margaret Chen will be placed in trust for children's education, not accessed by Daniel Morrison directly. There was more, but I couldn't see it through my tears. Your son sold you out, Raymond said, and there was genuine sadness in his voice. For $200,000 and a job promotion, he agreed to erase you from his life. But why would he? We were so close. I don't. Mrs. Chen, I interviewed someone else. A paralegal who worked with Daniel at his old firm. She said that about 6 months before the name change, Daniel started seeing a therapist that Patricia Morrison recommended, a Dr. Vanessa Whitmore. She specializes in something called family systems restructuring. What does that mean? It means, Raymond said carefully, that she helps people cut ties with family members they deem toxic or unhealthy. But here's the thing, Dr. Whitmore has been on the Morrison family's payroll for 15 years. She's helped Patricia Morrison alienate 3 different people from their families when they married into the Morrison clan. She's very good at what she does. I felt like I was falling, like the floor had opened up beneath me and I was tumbling into darkness. So she what? She convinced Daniel I was toxic. Raymond pulled out another document. I obtained Daniel's credit card records, legally, through public filings related to a civil case he worked on. He saw Dr. Whitmore 3 times a week for 4 months. And according to my source, the sessions always followed the same pattern. Patricia would meet with Dr. Whitmore before Daniel's sessions, providing her with context about family dynamics. Then Dr. Whitmore would guide Daniel toward realizing that his relationship with you was unhealthy, codependent, preventing him from fully bonding with his wife. But that's not, I know, Mrs. Chen. I've seen photos of you and Daniel. I've read the letters you wrote him that were returned. I've talked to your neighbors, your former colleagues. Everyone describes you the same way, devoted, kind, maybe a little lonely after your son moved out, but certainly not toxic or overbearing. This was a manipulation, a very sophisticated, very expensive manipulation designed to isolate your son and bind him to the Morrison family. I thought I might vomit. Daniel knows all this? He knows what they did. Raymond's expression told me the answer before he spoke. Mrs. Chen, the human mind is incredibly vulnerable to suggestion, especially when the suggestion comes from an authority figure like a therapist, and especially when it's reinforced by a spouse you love. Daniel probably genuinely believes that distancing himself from you was his idea, that it's what's best for his mental health and his marriage. That's how these things work. Patricia Morrison didn't force your son to change his name. She made him want to change it. I sat in that office, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief that had been drowning me for months crystallized into something else. Something cold and sharp and focused. Is there more? I asked quietly. Raymond hesitated. There's one more thing. And Mrs. Chen, this is the part that I really wish I didn't have to tell you. He pulled out a final document. An email chain, printed on paper. This is correspondence between Patricia Morrison and her attorney from 3 months ago. I obtained it through a source who works at their law firm. I read the email. Then I read it again. Certain I'd misunderstood. Kenneth, regarding the Chen matter, I need to ensure that when the time comes, there is no legal basis for the mother to claim grandparents' rights or interfere with our family. Please research what steps Daniel and Victoria should take to prevent any future contact or claims. Also, I need documentation showing a pattern of unstable or inappropriate behavior from the mother, in case we need to pursue a restraining order down the line. I'm meeting with Dr. Whitmore next week to discuss building that narrative. Best, Patricia. They weren't just cutting me out. They were preparing to destroy me completely, to paint me as dangerous, as someone who needed to be legally restrained from my own future grandchildren. This is insane, I whispered. They can't. They can, Mrs. Chen. And they're very good at it. Patricia Morrison has spent 30 years perfecting the art of controlling her family and everyone in it. Your son never stood a chance. I stood up, suddenly needing to move, to pace, to do anything but sit still with this information. So what do I do? How do I fight this? Raymond closed the folder. That's the problem, Mrs. Chen. You can't. Not legally, anyway. Daniel is an adult who made a legal decision to change his name and distance himself from you. The contract he signed with Patricia is probably unenforceable. You can't contract away someone's right to talk to their mother, but proving that in court would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and even if you won, you can't force your son to love you. As for the restraining order threat, they haven't actually done anything yet. It's just planning. So I just give up? Let them win. He looked at me for a long moment. Mrs. Chen, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen a lot of families destroy themselves over money, over pride, over revenge. The people who come out okay are the ones who know when to walk away. But I wasn't okay. I was dying inside, had been dying for months, and the only thing keeping me alive was the ghost of my son, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to tell me I was the smartest person he knew, who used to sign his birthday cards, "Your Danny," always. That boy was gone, and I needed to know if there was any way to get him back. I left Raymond's office with a folder tucked under my arm, $3,000 poorer and a lifetime's worth of innocence gone. I drove home on autopilot, barely seeing the road. When I got to my house, the house where I'd raised Daniel, where every room held memories of him, I sat down at my kitchen table and I read through every document Raymond had given me. All of it. The contract, the emails, the interview notes, the credit card records showing hundreds of therapy sessions. And then I saw it. A detail I'd missed before, buried in the interview with Patricia Morrison's former personal assistant. Mrs. Morrison keeps detailed files on everyone in the family. I once saw her office. She has cabinets full of documentation. Medical records, financial statements, therapy notes, private investigators' reports. She used to say, "Information is power." And that's when I realized something. Patricia Morrison wasn't the only one who could collect information. She wasn't the only one who could build a case. And she wasn't the only one who could play a long game. I had spent my entire career teaching literature, teaching students about dramatic irony and poetic justice and the fall of prideful characters. I knew how stories worked. I knew that every villain has a weakness, and every tragedy contains the seeds of its own reversal. Patricia Morrison's weakness was her own arrogance. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd simply fade away, a broken old woman grieving her lost son. She was wrong. I spent the next 2 weeks planning. Not revenge. That's too simple, too crude. I was planning something much more sophisticated. I was going to save my son, even if he didn't know he needed saving. The first thing I did was call an old friend from my teaching days. Martha Reeves had retired the same year I did, but she'd gone on to volunteer with a nonprofit organization that helped people escape financial abuse and family coercion. I met her for lunch and explained everything. "Margaret," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is textbook financial manipulation and alienation. The problem is proving it, and even if you could prove it, Daniel would have to want to be helped." "I know," I said. "But what if there was a way to show him the truth without confronting him directly? What if I could document everything, build a case so comprehensive that eventually, when the Morrison family inevitably shows their true nature, Daniel has something to come back to? Evidence that he's been manipulated?" Martha leaned back in her chair. "You'd need an airtight case. Documents, witnesses, recorded conversations if possible, though be careful about recording laws in California. You'd need to be methodical, patient, and you'd need to accept that it might take years. And even then, it might not work." "I have nothing but time," I said. "And I have to try." She nodded slowly. "Then let me make some calls. I know people who specialize in this kind of thing. Lawyers who handle family coercion cases. Therapists who work with alienated family members. We'll build you a team." Over the next 3 months, I became a different person. The grieving mother was still there, but she was buried beneath layers of focus and determination. I hired a family law attorney named Sarah Brennan who specialized in grandparent rights and parental alienation. I began seeing a therapist, a real one, not Patricia Morrison's pet psychologist, who helped me document my own mental health and stability. And I hired a second private investigator. This one was recommended by Sarah. Her name was Lisa Nakamura, and she was a former FBI agent who now worked exclusively on family law cases. I need everything, I told her. Every piece of evidence that shows Patricia Morrison manipulated my son. Every questionable business dealing, every time she's done this to someone else in the family, every single crack in her perfect facade. Lisa smiled grimly. Give me 4 months and $15,000. I had $23,000 left in my retirement savings. I gave her $17,000 and kept $6,000 for myself, just enough to survive on until my next pension payment. It was the best money I ever spent, because what Lisa found was explosive. She came to my house on a Tuesday evening in August, carrying 2 boxes of files and a laptop. She set everything up on my dining room table and said, "Mrs. Chen, Patricia Morrison is not a good person. But you probably already knew that. What you don't know is just how deep her manipulation goes and how many lives she's destroyed." Over the next 3 hours, Lisa walked me through her findings. Patricia Morrison had done this before. Not once, not twice, but 4 times over the past 20 years. Every time one of her children or close family members married someone she deemed unsuitable, she'd launched a campaign to either drive them away or assimilate them completely. Victoria's older brother, Marcus Morrison, had married a social worker named Jennifer 12 years ago. Within 2 years, Jennifer had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and family interference. According to court documents Lisa had obtained, Jennifer had tried to get a restraining order against Patricia, claiming harassment and psychological abuse. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, and Jennifer had signed a non-disclosure agreement. But Lisa had found Jennifer. She'd moved to Portland and remarried, and after some persuasion, she'd agreed to talk. Lisa played me an audio recording of their conversation. "Patricia Morrison is a monster," Jennifer's voice said through the laptop speakers. "I'm not exaggerating. She systematically destroyed my marriage to Marcus. She convinced him I was mentally unstable, that I was trying to alienate him from his family. She hired a private investigator to follow me, looking for dirt. When she didn't find anything, she fabricated evidence. She told Marcus I was having an affair, completely made up, with fake text messages she'd created. By the time I could prove it was all lies, Marcus didn't believe anything I said anymore. She broke us. And then she paid me $300,000 to go away and never speak about it. I took the money because I had no fight left. But I've regretted it every day since." There was more. Victoria's cousin had married a man from India. Patricia had launched a similar campaign. That marriage had ended within 18 months, and the husband had moved back to Mumbai. "She is a pattern," Lisa said. "She identifies the target, someone she views as a threat to family status or cohesion. She isolates them, often using the same therapist, Dr. Vanessa Whitmore. She manufactures evidence of instability or unsuitability. She offers money and opportunities to the family member who's married to the target, conditional on them cutting ties. And she always wins." "Until now," I said quietly. Lisa smiled. "Until now. Because I have something Patricia Morrison has never had to deal with before." She pulled out a thick document. "I have evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Those fake text messages she created for Jennifer? Still on a server that Patricia's tech guy maintained. I found the tech guy, he's retired now, guilty conscience, and he kept backup copies of everything. We have proof that Patricia Morrison created false evidence to destroy a marriage. That's illegal, Mrs. Chen. That's a crime." My heart started racing. This was it. This was the ammunition I needed. "But there's more," Lisa continued. "I dug into Morrison and Associates' finances. Patricia's husband Robert is the firm's senior partner, but Patricia controls a lot of the business decisions. And I found some irregularities. Specifically, I found evidence that the firm has been involved in several cases of client trust account violations. Nothing that's been prosecuted yet, but enough that if it came to light, the California Bar Association would have to investigate. Is Daniel involved in any of this? I asked, suddenly afraid.
No.
Daniel's clean. He's working in a different division, handling legitimate corporate cases. But he's being set up, Mrs. Chen. They're grooming him to take over portions of the business, and eventually, they're going to implicate him in their schemes, probably without him even realizing it. Patricia Morrison doesn't just want to control your son. She wants to own him completely, make him complicit in everything so he can never leave. I felt sick. What do we do with this information? Sarah, my attorney, had joined us by this point. She'd been listening quietly, taking notes. Now she spoke up. We have two options, she said. Option 1. We go to the Bar Association now, blow this whole thing open, and probably destroy the Morrison family legally and financially. Daniel would be collateral damage. His career would be over, his marriage would likely implode, and he'd blame you for all of it. That's not an option, I said immediately. I didn't think so, Sarah said. Option 2, we wait. We document everything. We build a comprehensive file that shows exactly what Patricia Morrison has done, not just to you, but to everyone. And we wait for Patricia to make a mistake. What kind of mistake? She will eventually overstep with Daniel. She always does. These controllers can't help themselves. Right now, Daniel is compliant, doing everything she wants. But eventually, she'll ask for something that crosses a line. Maybe she'll try to control how he parents his future children. Maybe she'll make a financial demand that feels wrong. Maybe she'll mistreat Victoria, and Daniel will finally see what she is. When that happens, when Daniel starts to question things, that's when we present him with everything we've found. We show him he's not crazy, that his doubts are valid, and we give him a way out. That could take years, I said. Yes, Sarah agreed. It probably will. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my son. My beautiful, brilliant boy who'd been stolen from me through lies and manipulation. I thought about the grandchildren I might never meet, the family holidays I'd never attend, the life I'd been erased from. And I thought about Patricia Morrison, sitting in her Napa vacation home, congratulating herself on another successful acquisition. Yes, I said. I'm prepared to wait as long as it takes. Over the next 14 months, I became a ghost in my own son's life. I stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped reaching out entirely. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, harder than burying my husband, harder than raising a child alone, harder than anything I'd experienced in 62 years of living. But I had a purpose now. Every day, I'd wake up and work on the case. Sarah had taught me how to organize evidence, how to maintain a timeline, how to document everything in a way that would be legally defensible. I kept meticulous records. Every article about the Morrison family, every public record I could access, every piece of evidence Lisa brought me. I also started writing long, detailed letters to Daniel that I never sent. I kept them in a fireproof safe in my closet, dozens of them. Hundreds of pages documenting my love for him, my memories of our life together, and most importantly, a clear timeline of Patricia Morrison's manipulation with references to all the evidence we'd collected. If I couldn't talk to my son, I'd create something he could read when he was ready, when he was finally able to hear the truth. I also did something else. I started attending family law seminars and support groups for alienated parents. I met dozens of people who'd lost children to manipulative ex-spouses or in-laws. Their stories were heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. But they also taught me something crucial. I wasn't alone, and this wasn't my fault. One woman, Karen, became a close friend. She'd lost her daughter to her ex-husband's wealthy family 15 years ago. The hardest part, she told me over coffee one afternoon, is accepting that you might never get them back. You have to grieve the relationship you lost while keeping a tiny flame of hope alive. It's an impossible balance. Do you still have hope? I asked her. She smiled sadly. My daughter reached out to me last year. She's 32 now, has 2 kids of her own, and she finally saw through her father's lies. It took 17 years, but she came back. So yes, I have hope. And you should too. That conversation sustained me through some of the darkest months. The breakthrough came in November, almost 2 years after Daniel had changed his name. Lisa called me late on a Wednesday night. "Mrs. Chen, turn on your computer. I'm sending you something." I pulled up my email. There was a video file attached. "What is this?" I asked. "Just watch it." I clicked play. The video was grainy security camera footage from what looked like an office building. The timestamp showed it was from 2 days ago. I watched as Daniel walked down a hallway, then stopped outside a closed door. He stood there for a moment, then pushed it open. Inside, Patricia Morrison was sitting at a desk, talking to another woman I didn't recognize. The audio was muffled, but Lisa had included a transcript. "Patricia, and once Victoria is pregnant, we'll need to start the paperwork for the trust. I want everything locked down before the baby comes. Daniel doesn't need to know the details, just that it's standard Morrison family practice." Unknown woman. What about the grandmother? Margaret Chen? Is she still a concern? Patricia. No. She's been silent for over a year now. The therapy worked perfectly. Daniel hasn't mentioned her in months. She's essentially dead to him, which is exactly what we needed. Once the grandchildren arrive, we'll make it clear to Daniel that she's never to have contact with them. If she tries anything, we have Dr. Whitmore's documentation ready to support a restraining order. Unknown woman. And Daniel will go along with that? Patricia. Daniel will do what I tell him to do. He always does. That's what happens when you pay for someone's entire life. They become loyal, whether they realize it or not. The video cut off. I sat in the darkness of my living room, shaking. "Mrs. Chen." Lisa's voice came through the phone. "Are you still there? How did you get this?" I asked. "I have a source inside Morrison and Associates. Someone who's been watching Patricia for years, waiting for her to implicate herself. This was recorded in Robert Morrison's private office. Patricia doesn't know the security cameras in that room are still active. Robert had them installed years ago during a company theft investigation and never removed them. My source has access to the footage. Is this legal? Can we use it? California is a two-party consent state, so we can't use it in court. But we can use it to show Daniel the truth. This is Patricia, in her own words, admitting that she manipulated him and planning to keep you from your grandchildren. This is what we've been waiting for." But I couldn't just send this to Daniel. He wouldn't believe it came from me. He'd been conditioned to distrust me, to see me as the problem. If I reached out now, Patricia would frame it as harassment, and I'd lose whatever slim chance I had left. "We need to wait," I said, though it killed me. "We need the right moment." That moment came 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon in early December. Sarah called me. "Margaret, have you checked the Morrison family's social media recently?" "No, why?" "Victoria is pregnant. She announced it on Instagram this morning. 6 months along. They kept it quiet until now." My grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother, and I hadn't even known Victoria was pregnant. The grief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. I was going to have a grandchild I'd never meet, never hold, never know. Patricia Morrison had made sure of that. But Sarah wasn't done talking. "There's something else. I've been monitoring Daniel's credit cards, legally, through public records, and he made a large purchase yesterday. A session with a different therapist. Not Dr. Whitmore. A Dr. Michael Reynolds, who specializes in family therapy and cult deprogramming." My heart stopped. Cult deprogramming? It could mean nothing, but it could mean that Daniel is starting to question things. The pregnancy is a huge life event. It's common for people to start reevaluating their family relationships when they're about to become parents themselves. He might be having doubts. "What do we do?" "We wait," Sarah said. "If Daniel is starting to wake up, we need to let him come to his realizations on his own. If we push now, we'll just drive him back to Patricia. But we stay ready. The moment he reaches out, the moment he shows any sign of doubt, we're prepared to show him everything." The waiting was agony. But I'd become good at waiting, good at patient suffering. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies, trying not to think about Daniel celebrating with the Morrisons in Napa, trying not to imagine Victoria's growing belly, my grandchild floating in darkness. unaware that there was a grandmother out here who loved them already, fiercely and completely. January arrived. Then February. I'd accepted that I might never hear from Daniel again, that I might have to wait until my grandchild was old enough to seek me out on their own, decades from now. But on February 19th, 2 years and 5 days after Daniel legally changed his name, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello. There was a long silence. Then, Mom? I dropped the phone. Actually dropped it, my hands shaking so badly, I couldn't hold it. I scrambled to pick it up, terrified he'd hung up, that I'd imagined his voice. Daniel? My voice was a whisper. Mom, his voice broke. I need to talk to you. Can I come see you? Today? Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Yes, sweetheart, of course.
Come now.
Come right now. I'll be there in 2 hours, he said. And Mom? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He hung up before I could respond. I called Sarah immediately. She called Lisa. Within 30 minutes, they were both at my house, helping me prepare. We set up a recording device, legal in my own home with my own son, and organized all the evidence into clear, digestible packets. But Sarah warned me, let him talk first. Let him tell you what he's realized on his own. Don't dump all of this on him unless he's ready to see it. 2 hours and 17 minutes later, I watched the clock, every minute an eternity. My doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was my son. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. He'd lost weight. His clothes were rumpled. And he was crying. Mom, he said, and then he was in my arms, sobbing like he hadn't since his father died, and I was crying too, holding him, stroking his hair, whispering that it was okay, that I was here, that I loved him. We stood in my doorway for 5 minutes, just holding each other. Finally, we moved inside. I made tea, muscle memory from 1,000 mother-son conversations over the years. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework, where we'd eaten dinner together for years, where I'd told him his father had died. Tell me, I said gently. Tell me what happened. And Daniel told me everything. He told me about the therapy sessions with Dr. Whitmore, how she'd gradually convinced him that I was emotionally manipulative, that my love for him was unhealthy and codependent. How she'd used terminology that sounded clinical and professional, enmeshment, boundary violations, toxic attachment patterns, to describe a relationship that had simply been a single mother loving her only child. He told me about Patricia's pressure, constant and relentless. How she'd convinced him that changing his name was about honoring his new family and starting fresh. How she'd made it seem like his idea, his choice, his path to maturity and independence. He told me about the money, the job, the lifestyle that had seduced him. How easy it was to justify cutting me out when he was surrounded by luxury and success. How Patricia had praised him constantly, made him feel like the son she'd always wanted, filled the mother-shaped hole he'd created by pushing me away. But it was never enough, he said, his voice raw. Nothing I did was ever enough for her. There was always another hoop to jump through, another way I needed to prove myself. And I started to realize, I started to see that she wasn't treating me like family. She was treating me like an employee, like something she owned. What changed? I asked. What made you see it? He took a shaky breath. Victoria is pregnant. We found out in June, but Patricia made us keep it secret. She said we needed to wait until the second trimester, until everything was secure. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that she was negotiating some kind of trust arrangement, some legal thing that I didn't fully understand. She kept telling me not to worry about the details, that it was standard Morrison family practice. He pulled out his phone and showed me a document. But I did worry. So, I hired my own lawyer, someone outside the Morrison family circle, and I had him review the trust documents Patricia wanted me to sign. And Mom, they were insane. Completely insane. I looked at the document. It was a 60-page trust agreement that essentially gave Patricia Morrison total control over Daniel's child, my grandchild. Educational decisions, religious upbringing, medical care, even where the child could live. Daniel and Victoria would have been parents in name only. When I confronted Patricia about it, Daniel continued, she said I was overreacting. She said this was how wealthy families protected their assets and their legacies. She said if I really loved my child, I'd want them to have the benefit of her experience and wisdom. And then she said, his voice broke again. She said that if I didn't sign it, she'd fire me from the firm and cut us off financially. She said Victoria would be better off divorcing me and raising the baby as a Morrison, not as the child of some mediocre lawyer from a mediocre family. Oh, Daniel, I whispered. And that's when I realized, he said, looking at me with devastated eyes. That's when I understood what she is. What she'd done to me.
To us.
She made me erase you from my life, Mom. My own mother. The woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, who loved me unconditionally. And I did it. I actually did it. I signed the papers, changed my name, cut you out of my life, all because Patricia Morrison convinced me it was what I wanted. He dropped his head into his hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. I moved around the table and pulled him into my arms again. My son.
My boy.
Finally home. I forgive you, I whispered. Of course I forgive you. You were manipulated by a professional, Daniel. This wasn't your fault. But I should have known better. I should have questioned it. I should have. Stop, I said firmly. Right now, we're not going to focus on what you should have done. We're going to focus on what we're going to do next. Because, sweetheart, I need to show you something. I called Sarah and Lisa into the room. Daniel looked confused, then shocked as I introduced them and began laying out all the evidence we'd collected. For the next 3 hours, we showed him everything. The contract with Patricia. The recordings of her planning to keep me from my grandchild. The evidence of her previous manipulations. Jennifer's testimony. The trust account violations at Morrison and Associates. Dr. Whitmore's history of working for Patricia. Every single piece of the puzzle. Daniel sat there, his face cycling through shock, anger, horror, and grief. When we finished, he was silent for a long time. I need to get Victoria out of there, he finally said. I need to protect my wife and my child from that woman. We can help you, Sarah said. But you need to be strategic. If you go back and confront Patricia directly, she'll destroy you. She'll turn Victoria against you. She's been working on Victoria for years too, probably. You need to extract yourself carefully. What do you suggest? Sarah pulled out a legal document. First, you file for a legal name change back to Chen. Do it immediately, before Patricia knows you've been here. Second, you resign from Morrison and Associates. You don't give them a reason, you just leave. Third, you sit down with Victoria, show her everything we've shown you, and you get her on your side. If Victoria stands with you, Patricia loses a lot of her power. And if Victoria doesn't believe me? Daniel asked quietly. Then you face a very hard choice, Sarah said. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Daniel left my house 4 hours after he'd arrived. He was crying again as he hugged me goodbye, promising he'd call me the next day, promising he'd fix everything, promising he'd never let anyone separate us again. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned in the past 2 years that promises are easy and follow-through is hard, especially when you're fighting against someone as powerful and ruthless as Patricia Morrison. I spent that night unable to sleep, terrified that I'd hallucinated the whole thing, that I'd wake up and find out Daniel had never come back to me. But the next morning, Sarah called. Daniel filed for the name change an hour ago. He's really doing this, Margaret. And 3 days later, Lisa sent me a news article. Daniel had resigned from Morrison and Associates, citing irreconcilable differences in professional ethics and family values. The resignation was public and messy, exactly the kind of thing that would humiliate Patricia Morrison in her social circles. The war had begun. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Patricia Morrison reacted exactly as we'd predicted, with scorched earth tactics. She tried to have Daniel blackballed from other law firms in San Francisco. She spread rumors that he'd had a nervous breakdown, that he was mentally unstable, that he'd stolen client files when he left the firm. She even had Dr. Whitmore write a formal letter expressing concern about Daniel's psychological state and recommending involuntary psychiatric evaluation. But we were prepared. Sarah filed a defamation lawsuit against Patricia and Dr. Whitmore. Lisa provided evidence to the California Bar Association about the trust account violations, triggering a formal investigation into Morrison and Associates. And I did something I never thought I'd do. I gave an interview to a reporter who'd been investigating elite family manipulation cases for the San Francisco Chronicle. I told my story. All of it. The name change, the contract, the alienation, the manipulation. I used my real name. I provided documentation. And I made sure to emphasize that this wasn't just about me. It was about every parent who'd lost a child to a manipulative in-law, every person who'd been gaslit into thinking their own loving relationships were toxic. The article went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been shared over 100,000 times. Other victims of Patricia Morrison started coming forward. The woman from India, whose marriage Patricia had destroyed. 2 other former daughters-in-law who'd signed NDAs, but were willing to break them now that the story was public. Even some of Patricia's former employees, tired of keeping her secrets. The Morrison family empire began to crumble. But the most important battle was happening in Daniel's home, between him and Victoria. He called me every day during this period, updating me on Victoria's reaction. At first, she'd been in denial, defending her mother, insisting that Daniel was exaggerating or misunderstanding. Patricia had trained her well, but Daniel was patient. He showed her the evidence, piece by piece. He introduced her to Jennifer, the former sister-in-law who'd escaped Patricia's clutches. He had her talk to his own therapist, Dr. Reynolds, who explained how family coercion and manipulation worked. And slowly, painfully, Victoria began to see her mother clearly for the first time. The turning point came when Patricia tried to visit their apartment unannounced to talk sense into them. Daniel told me later that Patricia had walked in with her usual confidence, expecting to bully them back into compliance. Instead, Victoria, 6 months pregnant and finally free of her mother's psychological hold, told Patricia to get out of her home and out of her life. "You tried to steal my husband from his mother," Victoria said, according to Daniel. "You tried to steal my marriage. And you were planning to steal my child. You're not a grandmother. You're not even a mother. You're a controller, a manipulator, and you're never going to touch my family again." Patricia tried to argue, tried to threaten, tried to use all her usual tactics. But for the first time in her life, they didn't work. Victoria and Daniel stood united, and Patricia had no power over them anymore. She left their apartment, and, according to Daniel, she was crying. It was the first time he'd ever seen her cry. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in May, I met my grandson for the first time. His name is Thomas Chen Morrison. Thomas for his grandfather, Chen for his father's family, Morrison because Victoria still loved her father and her siblings, even if she'd cut off her toxic mother. It was a compromise, a bridge between families, and I couldn't have been happier with it. I held him in my arms, this tiny, perfect creature, and I cried for everything we'd lost and everything we'd found again. Daniel stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, Victoria sitting in the hospital bed, watching us with a tired smile. "I'm sorry, Mom," Daniel said for the 1,000th time. "I'm so sorry you almost missed this." "But I didn't miss it," I said, looking up at him through my tears. "I'm here. We're all here. And that's what matters." Patricia Morrison tried to visit the hospital. Hospital security escorted her out. She tried calling, texting, sending gifts. Everything was returned unopened. She hired a lawyer and threatened to sue for grandparents' rights. Sarah destroyed her in court. The judge, after hearing testimony about Patricia's manipulation and reviewing the extensive evidence we'd compiled, not only denied her petition but issued a restraining order preventing her from contacting Daniel, Victoria, or baby Thomas. The California Bar Association suspended Robert Morrison and opened criminal investigations into 3 of the firm's partners, including Patricia herself for her role in destroying evidence and fabricating documentation. Morrison and Associates, a firm that had existed for 70 years, fell apart within 6 months. Victoria's relationship with her siblings survived, barely. Her brother Marcus reached out to apologize for not protecting her from their mother. They're rebuilding slowly, carefully. Victoria's father Robert divorced Patricia and is attempting to salvage what's left of his reputation and his relationship with his children. As for Patricia, I honestly don't know where she is now. I heard through Lisa that she moved out of state, possibly to Arizona or Nevada, somewhere she could start over where people didn't know her story. I don't take joy in her destruction, even after everything she did. I'm not that person. But I do feel a deep sense of justice and an even deeper sense of relief that my grandchildren will grow up free of her influence. Daniel and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly. There's damage there. How could there not be? There are moments when I look at him and remember the pain of those 2 years, the grief that almost destroyed me. There are moments when he looks at me and I can see the guilt eating at him, the knowledge that he erased his own mother from his life. But we're both in therapy, separately, and sometimes together, working through it. And most importantly, we're committed to never letting anyone come between us again. We've learned the hard way what happens when you let outside forces dictate your family relationships. I see Thomas twice a week. I babysit on Thursday afternoons while Daniel and Victoria both work. Daniel found a new position at a smaller firm that values integrity over prestige, making less money but sleeping better at night. I rock Thomas to sleep and sing him the same lullabies I sang to Daniel when he was a baby. I tell him stories about his grandfather, about the Chen family, about where he comes from. And I've started writing again, not the unsent letters I wrote during the dark years, but a memoir about family alienation and manipulation. Sarah thinks I should publish it. She says it could help other parents going through similar situations, could shed light on a form of abuse that too often goes unrecognized. Maybe I will. Maybe Thomas will read it someday and understand what his grandmother fought for, what his father overcame, and why family, real family, built on love and not control, is worth fighting for. I learned something through all of this, something I wish I'd understood before Patricia Morrison entered our lives. Love is not enough. Love is essential. Love is foundational, but love alone cannot protect you from manipulation or coercion or sophisticated psychological warfare. You also need awareness, boundaries, and the courage to fight for what's right even when fighting seems impossible. I learned that some people view family not as a source of love, but as a source of power and control. That some people, like Patricia Morrison, are so broken inside that they can only feel secure when they're pulling everyone around them like puppets on strings. I learned that the legal system is not equipped to handle family manipulation, that you can't sue someone for stealing your son's heart, that restraining orders and lawsuits are blunt instruments trying to address subtle, complex psychological abuse. But most importantly, I learned that truth is patient. That if you document everything, if you hold on to hope even when hope seems foolish, if you build your case carefully and wait for the right moment, truth will eventually prevail. It took 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. It cost me $20,000 in legal fees and investigator costs. It cost me sleep, peace of mind, and a piece of my heart that will never fully heal. But I got my son back. And I have a relationship with my grandson. And the woman who tried to destroy us is gone. So was it worth it? Every Thursday afternoon, when Thomas falls asleep in my arms and I sit in the rocking chair that used to be mine when Daniel was a baby, I think about that question. I look at my son, who comes to pick up his son from my house and lingers for dinner, who calls me to ask advice about parenting, who signed the legal paperwork to change his name back to Chen and kept Morrison as a middle name, a reminder, he says, of what he almost lost and the price of complacency. I think about Victoria, who's become like a daughter to me, who cried in my arms last month and apologized for not seeing what her mother was earlier, who tells me she's grateful I never gave up on Daniel even when he'd given up on himself. I think about all the other families Patricia Morrison destroyed and about Jennifer, who reached out to me after the Chronicle article and thanked me for speaking up, for giving her validation that what happened to her wasn't her fault. And I think about the future, about Thomas's first birthday next month, about the possibility of more grandchildren, about holidays spent together, about being present for school plays and graduations, and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. Yes, it was worth it. Every sleepless night, every dollar spent, every moment of grief and rage and desperate hope, all of it was worth it for this. But here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear. If you're going through something similar, if someone is trying to steal your family member from you through manipulation and lies, know that you're not crazy. Know that you're not alone. Know that there are people who make a living destroying families, and they're very, very good at it. But also know that you're not powerless. Document everything. Build your case. Find professionals who understand alienation and manipulation. Be patient, even when patience feels like surrender. And most importantly, never stop loving the person who's been taken from you, even when they seem to have stopped loving you back. Because love, real, unconditional, patient love, is stronger than manipulation. It just sometimes takes longer to prove it. Last week, Daniel brought Thomas over for our usual Thursday visit. As I opened the door, Daniel hugged me, something he does now, often, as if making up for all the hugs we lost. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I did something today. I wanted to show you." He pulled out his phone and showed me a document. It was an updated emergency contact form from his law firm. Under, in case of emergency, contact, there was only one name listed. Margaret Chen. Mother. Not Victoria's parents. Not Victoria herself, she was on there too, but I was listed first. "You're my emergency contact," he said quietly. "Because if something goes wrong, if I'm ever in trouble or lost or in danger, you're the person I want to reach me first. You're the person I trust most in the world. And I needed you to know that." I couldn't speak. I just held him while Thomas gurgled contentedly from his car seat, and I thought about all the emergency contacts in life. The people we trust to find us when we're lost, to save us when we're drowning, to bring us home when we've wandered too far. I lost my son once. I almost lost him forever to a woman who saw him as property, as status, as something to be acquired and controlled. But I fought for him, and he fought his way back to me. And now, when people ask me about those 2 years when my son erased me from his life, when they ask if I'm angry, if I hold a grudge, if I've truly forgiven him, I tell them this. My son didn't erase me. Someone tried to erase both of us, to erase our history, our love, our family. But you can't erase what's real. You can cover it, hide it, deny it for a while. But real love, true family, always finds its way back. Thomas is crying now. Hungry probably. I'm going to end this recording and go warm his bottle. Daniel and Victoria are coming for dinner tonight. We're having Thomas's favorite meal. Okay. Well, Thomas only drinks formula still, but we're having my favorite meal, the one I used to make every Sunday when Daniel was growing up. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the recipe Thomas's father used to make before he died. We're bringing back the traditions, creating new ones, building a family that Patricia Morrison couldn't destroy. And if you're listening to this, if you're going through something similar, if someone has stolen your child or your parent or your sibling through lies and manipulation, don't give up. Document everything. Build your case. Wait for your moment. And most importantly, keep loving them, even when they can't love you back. Because sometimes, the people we love get lost. But if we stay patient, if we leave a light on, they can find their way home. My son found his way back to me. And every Thursday afternoon, when I hold my grandson and rock him to sleep, I'm reminded that the fight was worth it. Every single moment of it. The most devastating part of this story isn't that my son changed his name to erase me from his life. It's that he almost stayed erased. It's that Patricia Morrison's plan almost worked perfectly, and I almost spent the rest of my life as a grandmother who existed only in legal documents, never in the memories of my grandchildren. The most devastating part is knowing how many families are living this nightmare right now, with no resolution, no happy ending, no Thursday afternoons. But the most beautiful part? The most beautiful part is that love, patient, documented, strategic, never giving up love can win. Sometimes. If you fight smart and wait long enough and refuse to become the monster they claim you are. My name is Margaret Chen. My son is Daniel Chen. And my grandson is Thomas Chen Morrison. And we are a family. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.